A servant pulls open a heavy wooden gate. The hinges groan in the cold April air. Tonight, they are slipping through the back alleys of the city to gather in the private residence of Caiaphas, the high priest. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, roasted meat, and the nervous energy of 500,000 occupied people gathered in one place. They are not just here for a religious festival. Passover is a memorial of the night God broke the empire of Egypt and set the Hebrew slaves free. But in the 1st century, with Roman soldiers actively patrolling the temple walls, that memory is radioactive. The pilgrims are celebrating a past liberation while suffering under a present occupation. The Roman eagle has simply replaced the Egyptian chariot. For the people sleeping in those tents, Passover is not just a historical holiday. It is a blueprint for revolution. This is the powder keg the Sanhedrin is sitting on. Jesus is overwhelmingly popular with the Galilean crowds. He is their prophet, their healer, the man who fed thousands on a hillside and rode into the city to the sound of royal acclamations. If the temple guard attempts to arrest him in broad daylight, in the middle of the crowded temple courts, the Galileans will fight back. It would only take one thrown stone, one shout in the courtyard, one clash of iron, and the Roman garrison would pour out of the Antonia fortress. The heavy infantry would march down the steps with drawn swords. The blood of the worshippers would mix with the blood of the sacrifices. They are gathering to put a rabbi from Nazareth on trial for his life. Most people read the account of this midnight trial, and the governor would lock the city down, stripping the high priest of whatever fragile power he still held. This is why the betrayal has to be bought with silver. They need Judas to show them where Jesus sleeps, away from the protective crowds. They have to ambush him in an isolated olive grove. They have to drag him through the dark, convene the illegal court, break every rule of their own jurisprudence, and secure the conviction before the sun rises. The entire operation is a frantic race against the dawn. They must finish the deed before the city wakes up and realizes their prophet is in chains. But as the sky begins to lighten over the Mount of Olives, their midnight theater hits a devastating wall. They have their conviction. They have the torn robes and the spit on his face. But they lack the one thing they actually need to make it permanent. The sun breaches the Mount of Olives. The sky turns pale gray over the city. The midnight charade is over. The verdict is guilty. The robes are torn. The spit is drying on his face. They bind his wrists again with heavy rope. They march him out of the courtyard. They move quickly through the waking streets. The limestone cobblestones echo with the boots of the temple guard and assume they are watching a story of absolute, tyrannical power. We imagine a sovereign court sitting in judgment over a helpless victim. The pilgrims in the tents are just beginning to stir, but they are not marching him to the edge of the city. According to the law of Moses, a blasphemer is supposed to be taken outside the camp and stoned. If they are the Supreme Court of Israel, if they truly hold absolute authority over the religious purity of the nation, they should execute the sentence themselves. They do not. They cannot. They march him to the Praetorium, the headquarters of the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. The transfer to Pilate is not a legal formality. It is a public confession of their own impotence decades earlier. The Roman Empire stripped the Sanhedrin of the jus gladii, the right of the sword. The Jewish court can debate theology. They can fine a merchant. They can order a man whipped with 39 lashes in the synagogue. But they cannot kill. Rome reserves the absolute monopoly on death. So the 71 most powerful men in Israel arrive at the governor's gate. They stop at the threshold. They refuse to step inside the pagan courtyard. If they enter a Gentile building, they will become ritually impure. If they are impure, they cannot eat the Passover lamb that evening. The hypocrisy is terrifying. We assume these 71 men held the fate of Jesus in their hands, operating a flawless religious machine that could not be stopped. They are actively framing an innocent man for execution. They are manipulating a pagan empire to murder a rabbi. But they are desperately concerned about keeping their hands ceremonially clean for a religious dinner. Pilate has to come out to them. The Roman governor steps onto the pavement. He looks at the bound carpenter. He looks at the furious priests. The illusion of the Sanhedrin completely evaporates on these stone steps. They have no sovereign power. They are reduced to begging a Roman politician to execute a Jewish peasant on their behalf. They hand over the man who holds the actual power of life and death, so they can keep their leased titles and their empty hall of stones. It is easy to look at Caiaphas on those steps and feel disgusted. We judge the high priest. We judge the men in the fine linen. But the most unsettling part of this midnight court is not how ancient and distant it feels. It is how familiar it looks. We look at the men standing outside the Roman gate, and we distance ourselves. We assume we would never make the calculation they made. We assume that if we were standing in the high priest's courtyard, feeling the cold April wind and smelling the pitch of the torches, but that reading ignores the shadows of first-century Jerusalem. If you look closely at the political reality of this moment, we would have spoken up. We would have defended the innocent rabbi against the corrupt system. But Caiaphas is not a cartoon villain. He is an institutionalist. He is a man who built his entire life around maintaining the structure, the treasury, and the quiet, predictable order of his world. When the disruptive reality of God showed up in his courtyard, it threatened the system he controlled. So he did the math. We do the exact same math. We may not wear fine linen or sit in a limestone hall, but we are a species deeply devoted to our own stability. We build our own temples. We construct our careers, our reputations, our comfortable theological boxes, and our carefully curated social circles. And when the actual, unfiltered demands of Jesus challenge those structures, panic sets in. Caiaphas's calculation is not a historical artifact. It is the default posture of the human heart. How often do we sacrifice the truth because it is sympharai, because it is expedient, profitable, and advantageous to keep the peace? We see it in polished boardrooms and quiet church committees. We silence the marginalized voice because the institution is too big to fail. We ignore the rot in the foundation because addressing it would cost us the building. We see it when a family ignores a destructive secret just to survive the holidays. At the exact location they are standing. At the hurried whispers. At the rules they are actively breaking, you start to see a very different picture. We see it when a leader covers up a moral failure to protect a brand. We feel the weight of sympharai in our own chests, when we sense the heavy conviction of the Spirit. But we calculate the social cost of obedience and quietly step back into the safety of the crowd. When the truth threatens the institution will almost always crucify the truth. We want the aesthetic of the holy without the danger of the divine. We want the gold-threaded garments, the stained glass, and the smell of frankincense. But we want to hold the keys ourselves. We want a Jesus who blesses our carefully managed empires, not a king who flips our tables and demands absolute allegiance. Caiaphas looked at the carpenter from Nazareth and realized he could not have both his least power and his true king. He had to choose, and he chose the heavy stones of the temple over the living word of God. But the ultimate tragedy of the midnight court is not just that they chose wrong. It is what history eventually did to the very thing they were trying so desperately to protect. A midnight court broke every law to secure a conviction, and the true judge stood silent in the dark. A high priest tore his sacred robes in manufactured outrage, and the veil of the temple prepared to tear in two. This is not a display of supreme authority. This is a panic attack. The Sanhedrin was not a sovereign court exercising divine justice. 71 powerful men calculated the cost of their survival, and the one man they sentenced paid the debt of the world. A fractured council met in secret to protect their limestone hall, and the true temple was preparing to be destroyed and razed in 3 days. The religious elites handed over their authority to a pagan empire, and the king of the universe allowed himself to be bound by Roman rope. A governor washed his hands of the blood, and that same blood washed clean the sins of humanity. The system sacrificed the truth to keep the peace, and the Prince of Peace walked willingly to a Roman cross. An illegal court. A frantic calculation. One king who let them win so he could save them anyway. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the threshold of the praetorium. The 71 most powerful men in Israel standing on the pavement, refusing to step inside a Roman courtyard because they were terrified of becoming ritually impure, condemning the living God to death, while obsessing over keeping their hands clean for a religious dinner. It is the ultimate picture of religious control masking internal decay. If you are in a season where you are exhausted from managing your own empire, from keeping up the aesthetic of control while the foundations are cracking, it was a desperate, compromised administration trying to survive the night. To understand the fear driving these men in the dark, look at the man bound in the courtyard. Jesus does not ask you to calculate the cost of your own survival. He does not ask you to maintain a flawless religious exterior. He asks you to step out of the heavy armor of your own management and simply surrender the keys. If this reached something in you, subscribe. Leave a comment, even one word helps. Share this with someone who is exhausted by the weight of their own control. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. And may the God who stood silent in the midnight court, who allowed himself to be bound so you could walk free, meet you in the middle of your own frantic calculations and give you the courage to finally lay your empire down. You cannot just look at the high priest sitting at the center of the room. You have to look at what was hanging over his head. 71 chairs sit empty on the Temple Mount. The official meeting place of the Great Sanhedrin is a magnificent chamber built into the northern wall. Torches spit pitch and smoke against the limestone walls of a private courtyard in Jerusalem. It is the middle of the night of the temple complex, known as the Hall of Hewn Stones. It is a place of gleaming white limestone, cool to the touch, designed for absolute order and transparency. Here, the Supreme Court of Israel is mandated to sit in a vast semicircle with the high priest at the center, so that every judge can look directly into the eyes of his peers while rendering a verdict. To a Jewish pilgrim traveling from Alexandria or Babylon, this room is the center of the universe. The number 71 is not arbitrary. It is a mathematical echo of the wilderness. In Numbers chapter 11, God commands Moses to gather 70 elders of Israel, plus Moses himself, to bear the heavy burden of leading a rebellious people. This first-century council claims to be the unbroken, living continuation of that desert assembly. They are the supreme authority on Jewish law, the final word on the sacred calendar, and the ultimate judges of anyone claiming to be a prophet. But underneath the fine linen robes, this council is a deeply fractured coalition. On one side, you have the Sadducees. These are the aristocrats, the pragmatists who control the high priesthood. They manage the massive temple treasury. They reject the idea of an afterlife, resurrection, or angels. Their entire theology is anchored to the physical stone of the temple and the heavy, metallic clink of silver, Tyrian shekels changing hands in the outer courtyards. On the other side are the Pharisees. The city is swollen with hundreds of thousands of Passover pilgrims, sleeping on rooftops and in makeshift tents across the surrounding hills. They are the populists, the meticulous scholars of the text. They believe God's presence can be accessed at a wooden kitchen table through ritual purity, not just at a bronze altar smelling of scorched flesh and frankincense. These two factions despise each other. They argue over everything from the resurrection of the dead to the proper way to wash a ceremonial bowl. Left to themselves, they would tear each other apart. The Sanhedrin is not a unified instrument of divine justice. It is a fragile, bitter political alliance held together by a single, terrifying glue, and that glue wears armor. To understand why these sworn religious enemies are suddenly willing to abandon their majestic hall and meet in a crowded, torch-lit living room in the middle of the night, you have to look up from the temple courtyard. Toward the sky in the northwest corner, a shadow falls across the white limestone of the Temple Mount. Look up at the northwest corner. 4 massive stone towers pierce the sky. Iron spears glint in the afternoon sun. Roman soldiers pace the high parapets. They look down into the Jewish courtyards. They watch the smoke rise from the bronze altar. They watch the pilgrims exchange silver. This is the Antonia Fortress. It is the garrison of the Roman Empire. It is Caesar's boot resting firmly on the throat of Israel. The air smells of roasting lamb, wood smoke, and dust. Inside this courtyard, men are arriving in the dark. In the daylight, they are untouchable. The Sanhedrin claims ultimate authority. They claim to answer only to God. But the men pacing those stone walls hold the real power. And they hold something else. Deep inside the Antonia fortress, behind a heavy door, guarded by a Roman seal, sits a wooden chest. Inside that chest is a garment. It is woven of gold, blue, purple, and scarlet thread. It is mounted with 12 precious stones. It is the sacred vestment of the high priest. Without this garment, the high priest cannot enter the Holy of Holies. Without it, there is no Day of Atonement. The entire religious system grinds to a halt, and a pagan governor holds the key. Every year, the high priest must walk up to the fortress, petition the Roman commander, and ask for permission to put on his own sacred clothes. The high priest is not a sovereign leader. He is a hostage in a holy robe. Caiaphas knows this. The Sadducees know this. The 71 men sitting in the Hall of Hewn Stones know this. Their power is least. Their authority is a fragile illusion permitted by the empire. Rome does not care about Jewish theology. Rome cares about tax revenue. Rome cares about absolute, quiet order. If a riot breaks out, Pilate will march his infantry out of the fortress. They trace their authority all the way back to the 70 elders who stood with Moses in the Sinai desert. Blood will mix with the sacrifices. It has happened before. The Romans will lock the temple doors. They will seize the treasury. They will strip the council of their wealth, their titles, and their lives. So when reports flood into the chamber about a carpenter from Nazareth, panic sets in. He is drawing crowds of thousands. He is flipping tables in the temple courts. He is raising a dead man named Lazarus, just 2 miles from the city gates. He is riding into Jerusalem as the crowd strip branches from palm trees, shouting, "Hosanna," a political battle cry for a new king. The men of the Sanhedrin do not see a theological debate. They see a spark heading straight for a powder keg. The calculation is immediate, but it takes a single, specific word to finalize the plot. The tension in the room is suffocating. Caiaphas, the high priest, stands. The political ground is shifting beneath them, and the council is fractured, paralyzed by the Roman shadow hanging over the temple. He needs to move them. He needs to bridge the gap between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He needs to frame the murder of an innocent rabbi as a moral necessity. The Greek text of John chapter 11 records the moment when they convene in their official chamber on the Temple Mount, the Hall of Hewn Stones. Their rulings dictate the lives of millions of Jews across the known world. He looks at his colleagues and utters a single, chilling word that justifies the entire betrayal. He says, "It is expedient for you that one man should die for the people." The word he uses is the Greek semphiroi. Its root is phero, to bear or to carry, and sin, together. Literally, it means to bring together, to gather, to contribute. But in the common usage of the day, it carries a very specific, utilitarian weight. It means to be advantageous, to be profitable, to be expedient. If you are finding these historical layers changing the way you read the Gospels, you are exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week, we go deeper into the text than most people know is possible. So Caiaphas builds his case on this one word. He isn't arguing that Jesus is guilty. He isn't arguing that Jesus broke the law. He is arguing that Jesus is a liability. Semphire is the language of the accounting office. It is the language of the temple treasury. It is the logic of someone who views human life as a variable in an equation of risk management. Caiaphas is doing the math of survival, one life sacrificed for the maintenance of the institution. He is claiming that the survival of the nation and, by extension, the survival of his own power. They are the elites of Israel, Pharisees with phylacteries bound to their foreheads, men who have memorized the law of Moses. Depends on the removal of this inconvenient prophet. This is not a debate about blasphemy. It is a calculation of cost. By framing it this way, Caiaphas creates a logic trap that makes it impossible for the council to disagree without appearing unpatriotic. If you vote to save Jesus, you are voting to lose the temple. If you vote to lose the temple, you are voting to destroy the nation. It is a masterpiece of political manipulation. And it works. From that day on, the council stops debating what to do. They start planning how to do it. But planning a murder is one thing. Executing it according to the law they claim to uphold is another. To make this stick, they have to navigate the very code they serve, and that requires breaking every single rule they had spent their lives writing. The guards drag Jesus through the courtyard. His hands are bound with rough rope. His face is bruised from the blows of the temple police. The torches cast long, violent shadows against the stone walls of Caiaphas's estate. Inside the house, the Supreme Court of Israel is tearing its own rulebook to shreds. These are men who debate the exact number of steps a person can take on a Sabbath. They argue over the precise way to tithe garden herbs like mint and cumin. They ritually wash their hands to the wrist before breaking bread to avoid defilement. Sadducees, draped in fine linen. Aristocrats, who control the massive wealth of the temple treasury. Together, they make up the Sanhedrin. They are obsessed with ceremonial perfection. Yet tonight, they are slaughtering their most sacred procedures. They are breaking them one by one. They know a capital trial cannot begin at night. A man's life cannot be weighed in the dark. But the sun has been down for hours. They know the judges must sit in the hall of hewn stones. They are crowded into a private living room. They know a death sentence requires a 24-hour waiting period. A judge must go home, eat sparingly, drink watered-down wine, and sleep on his decision to ensure mercy has a chance to speak. But these men are not going home. They are forcing a verdict before dawn. They know the law requires perfect agreement from two witnesses. But the men they drag into the room are tripping over their own lies. One says Jesus threatened to destroy the temple. Another changes the wording. The testimonies clash. The case is falling apart. They know the law forbids condemning a man based on his own confession. But Caiaphas stands up, frustrated by the failing witnesses, and places Jesus under a divine oath. He demands an answer. Jesus speaks, and Caiaphas immediately uses those words to seal the conviction. Caiaphas rips his own robe in a show of outrage. The sound of tearing linen echoes across the room. This, too, is a violation. The 71 members of the Supreme Jewish Council. But tonight, they are not on the Temple Mount. Leviticus expressly commands that the high priest must never tear his garments. This is not a legal proceeding. It is an assassination with a gavel. They are supposed to vote one by one, starting with the youngest, so that the junior judges are not intimidated by the elders. Instead, the room erupts into a mob, shouting his guilt in unison. According to their own ancient traditions, a unanimous guilty verdict, without a single voice for the defense, is considered proof of a biased court, and the prisoner should actually be released. They ignore that. 2. Every broken rule is a confession. Every shattered protocol screams the truth. When the law becomes an obstacle to your survival, the law is the first thing you sacrifice. But why the desperate rush? Why not hold him in a cell? Why not wait for the sun to come up and do this by the book? Because they are standing on the edge of a volcano, and the clock is ticking. The population of Jerusalem usually hovers around 80,000 people. But in the second week of April, that number violently expands. Historians estimate the city swells to nearly 500,000 bodies during the week of Passover. Pilgrims from Galilee, from Alexandria, from Rome and Babylon choke the narrow limestone alleyways. They pitch thousands of tents on the surrounding hillsides, cooking over open fires.